Welcome to Ogilvy and Mather, Chicago. My name is Jeremy Pettit. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of my co-chairs Rudy Rios, James Phillips, Dean Benson, all the way in the back, and also our president and executive sponsor, Lee Newman, right here in the middle. I want to thank you all for being here today. This is very, very exciting for us, and I know it's very exciting for you as well. Wanted to just really quickly tell you a little bit about Ogilvy, and then obviously a little bit about what we're doing here. For those of you who don't know, Ogilvy and Mather is a fully integrated marketing agency here in Chicago, but we're actually headquartered out of New York City. We have offices all around the world, but here in Chicago, we have about 550 people that build brands every day. We work with brands like SC Johnson, Glade, Huggies, Pull-Ups, Goodnights, all of Kimberly-Clark, Sargento Cheese, Pinnacle Vodka. We have a really, really great roster of clients we really love to work with. And obviously, if you guys are interested in knowing more about that, we would love to talk to you about it. But that aside, we're actually here to talk just a little bit more about the LGBT community and to talk about, I think, obviously United Pride, their first external event, which is major props to you guys. Very, very good. Round of applause for that one. It's actually really important to us that we were able to have this event because it was a year ago, I guess it was last October 11th, it wasn't this last Saturday, but National Coming Out Day that we kicked off our own LGBT professional resource group, Ogilvy Pride, here in Chicago. Since then, we have been able to triple the size of the group. Obviously, a lot of allies involved in that, as well as LGBT employees. But we really, really, really believe in a diverse workforce and a diverse place that embraces ideas and cultures of all kinds. So it's really an honor to be a part of this event for you guys and to kind of bring you all together here in Chicago. That said, without further ado, I think I'm going to hand off to Risa, and she is going to kind of take it from here. And again, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much. And good evening, everybody. That's working, right? Okay. All right. We're so excited to have you here, and we're so appreciative to Ogilvy. Thank you so much for your hospitality, and thank you all for coming out. It really means a lot to us to have you here to help us support the launch of United Pride. We decided to create United Pride, the affinity group, for a lot of reasons. We strongly believe in justice and equality for all community members. We saw a real need to support programs that serve the LGBT community, and a couple of stats that really resonated. Every year in Chicago, almost 9,800 young people experience homelessness. Up to 40% identify as LGBT. LGBT youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their straight peers. Realizing this need, United Way of Metropolitan Chicago supports programs that address issues like homelessness, depression, health, and education. We're dedicated to making a difference in the lives of LGBT youth and adults across the community. United Pride is open to any person who identifies as LGBT or is an ally to this community. We see this group as a way for our supporters to band together, to advocate for rights, to volunteer in meaningful projects, and to support life-changing programs that serve the LGBT community, and to have some fun as we work together on common issues. We look forward to exploring issues that are important to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals, and mobilizing the caring power of the LGBT community in concert with United Way on behalf of families in need. Together, we can make a difference for so many people across the region. Thank you for celebrating this milestone with us this evening. We're very, very appreciative of your presence. I'm proud to introduce a powerful advocate who will share insights around policies affecting the LGBT community. Mr. Gautam Raghavan is the Vice President of Policy at the Gill Foundation and is the former White House Liaison on LGBT affairs. At the Gill Foundation, Gautam drives the agency's efforts at both the federal and state level to ensure a level playing field for all LGBT Americans. From 2011 to 2014, He served as President Obama's liaison to the LGBT community, as well as the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. He directed the White House's outreach around major policy developments advancing LGBT equality, including the President's support for marriage equality and the implementation of the Supreme Court's decision in Windsor, the signing of an executive order prohibiting federal contractors from discriminating against LGBT workers, the rollout and implementation of a presidential memorandum on international LGBT human rights, and administrative actions prohibiting LGBT discrimination in housing, healthcare, and other areas. From 2009 to 2011, he served as Deputy White House Liaison for the U.S. Department of Defense and as an outreach lead for the Don't Ask, Don't Tell working group. We are delighted to have him here. Please welcome Gautam Raghavan.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Gautam Raghavan. It's great to be here. Thank you for that very kind introduction. You know, it's really an honor always to be in front of a group of people who care about equality and fairness and opportunity. So I'm so honored to be here and really impressed by the turnout. And by the way, this place is really hip. This is like coming from DC where everything is stuffy and old. This is like, wow, it's very cool. And you're a very well-dressed group of people. So, and so like I said, so thank you for being here. You know, whether you consider yourself sort of a full-time activist or sort of a casual advocate or an ally, your being here, I think, speaks volumes about your personal commitment and your organization's commitment to equality. So thank you for doing that. As you just heard, I, until very recently, had the honor of serving as the White House liaison to the LGBT community. All told, I worked for the president for about 6 years. And that part of my personal story, my professional story, actually starts right here in Chicago, back in 2008 when I worked for then Senator Obama's presidential campaign. My friend Justin's in the back, and he and I worked in that black building right over there on, what was it, North Michigan? 233 North Michigan, did I get that right? In the summer of 2008, when we were electing this junior senator from Illinois to be president of the United States. And you know, back then, we talked a lot about hope and change and about, you know, change we can believe in, which is grammatically incorrect. It should be change in which we can believe, but I guess the ad people in this room will tell you that that wouldn't have flown. Change we can believe in. And you know, despite all the cynicism and disappointment and frustration that comes with being in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot of that, hence Congress, despite all of that, I really am as hopeful and optimistic about our country and about how we can create change than I've ever been. And a big part of the reason why I am so hopeful and optimistic is because I've seen that change happen firsthand. And I can't think of a better example of that kind of sweeping and transformative change than what we've seen happen for the LGBT community over those 6 years. So I think that's evidence to show that it is all possible. And I think it's always good to just take stock and remind ourselves of everything that's happened in that span of time. And I won't go into the super long list, but some of the highlights, right? We passed a hate crimes law that has Matthew Shepard's name on it, because in this country, you shouldn't be afraid of walking down the street holding your loved one's hand and looking behind you to worry about who's going to come after you. We repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was at an event earlier today and I was like, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Remember that was a thing? Like, it seems crazy now to ever think that in this country you couldn't serve the country you love because of who you love. I mean, that was the law of the land for 17 long years, and we got that done too. You know, we stepped up our game internationally and said to activists and advocates in parts of the world like Uganda and Russia and Jamaica that you're not alone and that the United States government, the United States people are with you in your fight. You know, and I think most importantly, because Edie Windsor, this wonderful old lady took her case to the Supreme Court, to the highest court in the land, and because the president and the attorney general and 5 Supreme Court justices agreed with her about the unconstitutionality of this, as I like to say, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, because we struck that down, now you're seeing the dominoes fall all across the country, right? Like it feels like you can't even update the marriage equality map before like the next day you have to update it again. And I'm so confused now because we were at 30 and I think we're at 31 today because something happened in Louisiana and I'm not really sure what's happening, but it's moving fast, right? And it's the dominoes are falling, and because of it, legally married same-sex couples all over this country are getting access to immigration benefits, tax benefits, military family benefits that they've never had before and that their straight counterparts have always had. So it's really astounding progress, and it's been incredibly fast and kind of whirlwind. But I think it's also important to remember this is not just about changing laws and policies. Perhaps more importantly, it's also about changing hearts and minds, right? I think as a country, in these last 6 years, but certainly longer than that, we've grown to understand what it means to be lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender. The vice president likes to talk about how Will and Grace has done more for the LGBT community than any law or policy has done, and I love Joe Biden. And he's not entirely wrong in terms of what does it mean to humanize our stories, right? Like earlier today, I think some of you were at this event that I got to participate in with Laverne Cox, and to see what she represents and what her story represents, and putting a face on a community that many Americans will never get the chance to know personally. It means a great deal. And so that change and acceptance has, I think, fueled a lot of the change that we're seeing in terms of law and policy. So I think we should celebrate all this progress, right? Like, Pride Month's a great time. Go celebrate, go nuts. But I think it's also important to remember that there's so much work to do, and also that this work didn't just happen on its own, right? It happened because the earliest activists in places like New York and San Francisco and right here in Chicago, they came out and they marched and they protested and they were arrested in some cases. And they did this in the face of tremendous odds. And how many of you, by the way, have been to Stonewall, the Stonewall Inn in New York? Show of hands. Actually, a good chunk of you. If you've been, it's like not much to look at. It's like this dark old bar, kind of cruisy. And you go in there. If you go in there for the first time, you're like, really? Like this is what they were fighting for? But think about what it was like in 1969. Think about what it would have been like to not be able to go out with your friends and get a drink, or not to be able to assemble peacefully, or to be turned away or demeaned or assaulted for who you are. These things still happen, but think about what that was like and how much progress we made. And it happened because people showed up and they demanded their full equality. And it happened because people came out, right? Like this is quintessential Harvey Milk. When we come out, people get to know us and they love us. And it makes it harder for them to deny us our freedom. And so what that meant was that a lot of really brave folks had really hard conversations with their coworkers or their priests or their parents or their kids in some cases. And they weren't afraid to dress according to the gender that they are, not the sex that was assigned to them at birth. And they were willing to put up photos, and they were willing to take risks. They were willing to file lawsuits. All of that happened, and that's why we're where we are today. And I think, very importantly, change happened because we had allies, right? Like, this is never going to be something that a bunch of queer folks could do on their own. We needed allies every step of the way, and certainly going into the future, we're still going to need those allies. So the intensity and the pace of this progress has been extraordinary and inspiring, and I think should fill us all with a lot of hope. But I am here to say it should also fill you with a little bit of fear. And the fear comes from the idea that people are going to think that we're done, right? That well-intentioned folks, our allies, and even members of our own community who should know better will assume that this kind of change is just self-executing, right? That it'll happen on its own, and we can just stand back and go do our thing, go to happy hour, and we're good. I think it's fear for me that funding for these organizations, right, which have to be watchdog organizations, which have to implement this work on the ground, that funding is going to dry up. And we've seen this happen around the country. When a state gets to marriage equality, the funding goes away. And that, I think, is something that should make us all fearful. It's fear that the journalists are going to find something else sexy to talk about, that all of a sudden the gays aren't that interesting and they're going to go write about something else, and then the media attention and the public attention and awareness around our issues will go away. And fear also that there's going to be a whole generation of people who don't know what it's like to fight for your rights, who are not going to, on one hand, it's great that we're going to have a whole bunch of people who will grow up never having to sort of question their full legal equality, or will take for granted the fact that they can get married, or they can change their gender marker on their birth certificate. But I think it also should fill us with a little bit of fear that they're not going to know in the same way that me and folks my generation didn't live through the AIDS epidemic in the way that so many others did. I think not having that direct experience makes me worry that activism and advocacy are going to ebb away. And it comes back to me to something that the president said in his second inaugural address. And I remember being there. Were any of you there? Second inauguration in DC. So a couple of you. It was really cold. It was super packed, and I was standing by a bunch of porta potties, and people were climbing on top of the porta potties, which strikes me as a really bad decision. But there it was, and there was like a pro-life guy in a tree who was yelling loudly. It was, it's inaugural, and like something the president said just like struck me to my core, and it's one of my favorite quotes from his speech, and he said, quote, "We the people declare today that the most evident of truths, that all of us are created equal, is the star that guides us still, just as it guided our forebears through Seneca Falls and Selma and Stonewall." And I think that connection of moments, I think, connects our movements, right? Seneca Falls, Selma, Stonewall. And I think it reminds us, just as we see that whether it's civil rights or women's rights or the fight for reproductive justice, we have to be vigilant, and the work continues every single day. It doesn't just stop. And the fact is, for our community, for the LGBT community, we are still a community of haves and have-nots. Those of you who were at the Chicago House event earlier today heard us talk about this, that we live in a landscape where if you live in Chicago or if you live in DC like I do, you can go get married, you can go to work and not be fired for being who you are. You can walk down the street knowing that you have the protection of some laws. But for so many members of our community, that's not true. I mean, today, gay couples can get married in 30 states around the country. I think it's 30. Like I said, it's somewhere between 30 and 50 at this rate. So 30 states, let's say, in DC. But in 8 of those states, you can be fired for getting married on Monday and then putting up a wedding photo on Tuesday. So think about that we have more states that let you get married than protect LGBT workers. That, to me, is just all backwards. Today, a transgender woman can be on the cover of Time magazine, and as she reminded me today, on Essence magazine as well. And yet, transgender women of color are beaten and assaulted and killed every single day, every week, all across this country. Today we tell kids it gets better, but the fact is that many of these kids are going to be rejected by their families, even today. And they're going to end up on the streets, and they may end up homeless, like we have here in Chicago and in cities all around the country. And some of them will end up in the criminal justice system. And today we make movies about AIDS like it's like something in the past, oh yeah, that thing, remember when that happened? We ignore the fact that infection rates are still on the rise among gay and bisexual men of color. So here's the deal. We have big problems and challenges to face, but the good news is we also have big solutions. That's something that Dustin Lance Black said today, and it really stuck with me. We have big solutions. And I think the number one solution we have is all of you. Right? Like everything I said at the beginning about how we've been able to get change to happen, whether it's federal policy or people, changing their hearts and minds about these issues, it happens because of people like all of you. And if I could leave you with one message, it's that we all have a role to play, and that role can be anything you make of it, right? It can be, if you work for a Fortune 500 company, it can be making sure that your company helps make that business case for equality, right? And make the point that our shared prosperity as a people really hinges on our shared humanity, and that we have so much more in common. And if you're, a consultant, I don't really know what Ogilvy does, but if you're one of those people, it means that use those skills, right? Use those skills and that expertise to help us think about how do we use social media and branding and marketing to create a global conversation about LGBT equality. It's also, I think, very importantly, being a good ally to someone, right? Like I said, we couldn't have gotten here without our allies. So it means, and being an ally is showing up, number one. It's asking questions. Do it nicely, but it's good to ask questions sometime. And then it's speaking up when folks can't because they don't feel safe or because they're worried about their jobs or they're worried about what people will say. So it's that too. So making this kind of change, I think it's so important to stress, doesn't require being a professional activist. I think it does mean being a passionate advocate, and you have to get involved, and you have to get engaged, and you have to realize that this fight is not over. There's so much work left to do, and if you sit it out, I think that's just completely unacceptable. So I think that this is a room full of people who are going to be actively engaged in this conversation, and I look forward to getting a little into the weeds and some questions.
I'm just wondering, in your work with the Gill Foundation, what their focus is on right now, and if you could talk more about kind of what's the inside story of what Gill is doing, and what you think's their best achievements and that sort of thing.
Sure. So I'm only 6 weeks in, so I don't have like all the skeletons in the closet yet. Closet, that's a weird thing to, anyway, I'm not going to use that again. A couple of things. And one of the reasons I was really excited about going from the White House and from the federal government to the Gill Foundation was really, I think where we are right now as a community and as a movement is thinking hard about two things. One, non-discrimination. Right, like as I mentioned, the fact is that you can be fired for being LGBT in a ton of states around this country. So we have to fix that. There's more to do federally in terms of non-discrimination, in terms of healthcare, housing, public accommodation. Like there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of work to be done in these states too. And we have to figure out how do you go into states, mostly in the South, but not entirely, some in the Midwest as well, and help build the capacity of those organizations on the ground that are doing this work. That's so important. And the other, like I said, so that's I think a big focus of what we're thinking about in the years ahead. And for me, I think it's, I think the fight for marriage equality has been a really important one because I think it has, I like to think of it as like it's a gateway drug, right? It's like you get an iPod and then you get an Apple. So hopefully it puts a face and a story on our community. But the thing is, it's not the whole community. And we have to really think about how do we now do this really hard work around non-discrimination. We've been fighting this fight for decades. And why have we not gotten anywhere? Is it because 80% of people think you can't be fired for being LGBT, which is true, 80% of people in this country think you can't? Is it because no one's really picking a fight on this issue? I don't know. But I think we have to be sort of proactive about that work right now. One of the things I love about the foundation is that they were funding work around marriage equality when people thought they were crazy, and there were very few people back then who were really doing that work. And so I think we have to be really strategic and risky, and like go into places like Texas and Florida and figure out, how do we support these organizations? And it's going to take a lot of work.
Seeing as that a lot of people in this crowd are from LGBT business resource groups at corporations, what do you see as the role of corporate America in furthering the issues that are facing the LGBT community?
That's a great question, and let me answer it in two different ways. One is, I think the voices of business leaders, of private sector leaders, are going to be disproportionately helpful in some of the places where we have yet to achieve equality. So, activists and civil rights folks and progressives aren't going to tip the balance in our favor in a lot of these really conservative parts of the country or around the world, but business can, right? So when you have a CEO who goes to, I don't know, like the trade minister in an ex-African country and says, look, we really want to bring business to your country, but we can't because our LGBT employees don't feel safe here, or because it's bad for our brand. Like that means something. In many cases, it may mean more than the U.S. government having to say something about it. So I think there's the voice of business leaders. We saw this with all the briefs around DOMA. Having CEOs and major companies speak up is incredibly important. The other piece, though, I think is there's a real value that employee resource groups can play. I was talking to an executive from an unnamed tech company who said that, look, like what spurs us to action is not like the branding piece of this, and it's not like the media attention. What it is our employees telling us we have to get involved. So if there's something going down in a state, I mean, this won't apply necessarily here in Illinois, but if there are a bunch of employees at a major outpost of that company in a state, and they're trying to like pass, some sort of crazy anti-gay law, having those employees speak up can spur that company to take action. So I think that's something to really think about. And the progress that companies have made in terms of domestic partner benefits, around offering transgender health care, a lot of that has happened because employees spoke up. So I think that's another really important piece of it.
You mentioned earlier that the trans community, specifically trans women of color, experience more violence than really any other group of people in this country. Can you talk a little bit about any policy that may be in the works, or any change that could be coming, extra protection?
Right. So let me sort of break that into, did everyone hear the question? The question was about sort of the violence that is experienced by the transgender community, and specifically trans women of color. I mean, like I said, let me break that into, I think, two pieces. So one is in terms of protections. We have a federal hate crimes law, which is important and relevant, but you still need state and local hate crimes laws as well, and you need law enforcement to be trained. So there's a lot that can be done to just, train police officers on what it means to, like, what are the trends that impact various parts of our community. And there are, there are specific programs that places like Chicago House and other organizations on the ground can do, whether it's jobs training or, there's some really interesting things happening in this space all over the country. Separate from that, if you look at sort of like the cause of this, if you're looking at transgender women of color, they're experiencing discrimination from so many different ways, right? Because they're women, because they're people of color, because they're transgender, and those all work with each other. Like, those factors work with each other, and so I think it is very complicated. It's very hard to talk about. I think now there's growing awareness within the community that we need to be thinking about the most vulnerable parts of our community. But this has been, this is a very recent conversation that folks are finally willing to have. So, it's like I said, it's not just employment. It's where do you get housing? It's where do you get your health care? It's can you change your birth certificate or your driver's license to reflect who you really are? Like, those are all important pieces of this. And so, like I said, I hope that there is a renewed interest and passion around this.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the question is, we hear a lot. There's varying degrees of very bold statements often thrown around. The most diverse administration in history, or more LGBT appointees than any other before. From your unique position in the White House, how have you seen that impact, that manifest on policies that impact our community?
It really does make a huge impact. I mean, we did, when I was in the administration, have a record number of LGBT appointees. And beyond the fact that we had really qualified people everywhere in the government, every place where we've made a policy change or like a regulation change affecting the LGBT community, we had a member of the community or a strong ally in some cases involved in that process, right? Like that, think about that. Like when there were a couple of us who worked on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was important that we were there and a part of those conversations. I had colleagues who worked at the Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Housing and Urban Development on their non-discrimination rule, which now means that you can't be turned away or discriminated against in federally funded housing. The folks who are working on the Affordable Care Act and on healthcare implementation. It's important that we have members of our community there who can help inform that conversation and speak from their personal experience in many cases. So every single place we've seen a change, there's been someone in the room who is a member of the community. And so I would offer, with 2 years left, there's still a lot of really exciting positions open. So if any of you are interested in the possibility of serving the administration, feel free to find me or find Justin afterwards, so we can sort of sell you on why it's so meaningful and why it really works.
You said that we still have a lot of work to do, and we're becoming a little complacent, that we still have a lot of issues like LGBT homelessness, AIDS, HIV rates increasing, and that the solution is actually our LGBT groups. What do you feel, how do we should get more involved? How should we get more engaged? How can we energize our memberships within our LGBT groups in order to get more involved, since they are falling into that complacency state?
Yeah, and let me just sort of expand on that a little bit. I think I'm not just sort of making this up. Well, sometimes I do, but in this case, I wasn't making it up. I think it's instructive to look at the movements that have come before us, right? So if you look at how is it that 50 years after the civil rights movement, something like Ferguson happens, right? Or how is it that after Roe v. Wade is settled law, women's reproductive rights are being eroded at a state level. Like this is happening, right, to other movements. And so it'll happen to us too. So we have to be like continued vigilance and we have to be continually active. I think the sort of simple and I think best answer to your question is just to start locally, right? Like it's not, the most important change actually happens at that local level. Whether it's organizing, if there are lawyers who are organizing like a legal clinic to help people with gender marker changes or filing their taxes, because taxes are super confusing, especially if you have like all sorts of, like 1 year you were considered married by the federal government and now you weren't, and now you are. Like there's all that sort of complication. It can be, like I said, working through your employee resource group to sort of push for your company or your organization to expand its healthcare benefits. I think there's a lot of that. Like it doesn't have to be big sort of crazy national stuff. It can be very, very local. And there are so many organizations right here in Chicago who are so incredibly under-resourced, right? Who could use any expertise, pro bono help, volunteer help you can offer. Whether it's like a PFLAG chapter or like the Trans Life Center or the Center in Halstead. I mean, there's so many organizations here that could use that support. So I think, be creative. There's no lack of opportunity to be taken advantage of.
So, Gautam, obviously you came from the 08 campaign, which is famed for its grassroots. As we launch United Pride here, what advice do you have from that kind of grassroots movement to get people involved and get the community involved? What takeaways do you think? Even I've talked to some companies whose LGBT groups are, struggling to get people excited and involved there. What should those grassroots ideas should we take away?
So I think this answer is more informed by my job at the White House than it was from the campaign. But I think the most important and effective thing you can do in advocacy is to tell actual people's stories. Like that by far. I mean, white papers are great, and yes, you need them, and you need memos and all that kind of thing. But when you actually have like the real story of whether it's an employee or someone who's a part of the local community, that to me trumps everything else. And again, where we've seen a lot of the changes that we've seen over the last 6 years, whether it's Edie Windsor, we all know her story, or like for instance, the reason that hospitals that get federal funding can't discriminate is because the president heard about this woman in Florida who was like about to leave on vacation with her wife, and her wife collapsed and had an aneurysm, and then she was kept from her bedside, right, while she lay dying. Like those stories, oftentimes are incredibly heartbreaking and tragic, but that's really, I think, what prompts change. So I would say, to the extent possible, try to collect and lift up those stories.
Well, with that, then I will send it over to United Pride's been an internal group for United Way for a few years now. They were actually one of the first in existence in the United Way system, and I'll turn it over to their co-chairs, Matt and Seth, to kind of make some parting remarks.
Before we do that, please say thank you to Gautam for his time. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's an important day for us, for the United Pride Employee Resource Group. It's an important day for United Way. We have a lot of really great stuff coming up, so please indulge us for a minute as we say a few thank yous. But my name is Matt Katzfa. I'm Director of Corporate Partnerships at United Way. I am also the co-chair of our United Pride Employee Resource Group, and I am an ally.
And excuse me, my name is Seth Vermelia. I'm the co-chair of our United Pride group. I am also a senior project manager at United Way, and I just got married to my partner of 13 years. Woo!
Woo! I wasn't invited. The record. So before we move on and get to the bar, just please indulge us for a couple moments. We have a lot of people to thank on here. We have a few people we want to recognize. So Seth.
All right. Thank you. We just want to first thank Lee Newman, the president of Chicago, or Ogilvy Chicago president, for supporting this effort through just giving this awesome space, right?
Thank you to Rudy Rios, Jeremy Pettit, the entire Ogilvy Pride group. They helped to plan this event. They provided all the food and the beverages.
And a huge thank you to Gautam for being here today. We really appreciate you taking time. We know that you had another event today, so thank you for sharing your perspective, your insight.
Thank you to the entire United Way staff. United Way, we are very fortunate to have an incredibly passionate staff that supports all of our events, but especially the Pride ERG, Liz Clark that you saw earlier, Lisette Huertas at the back for planning this out, and Andrea Bazan, our executive sponsor, and thank you to Risa Davis for her remarks earlier as well.
And we especially want to thank all of you for taking time to be here, for coming, for wanting to get involved. It's really important and exciting for us as we start this new venture. It's ridiculously exciting for me because I never thought we'd get here. So I really am excited about your passion and your innovation for taking the opportunity to make some change in the LGBT community with United Pride.
And last but not least, we are very fortunate to have a terrific group of volunteers that's going to lead, direct, and guide this group. This is part of our advisory committee. So I'm going to recognize these individuals by name, and I'm going to call them out and ask them to stand out if they would. Jerome Harper from Northern Trust. Brett Taylor from Quest, or something. It just changed. Doug Sanborn. Where's Doug? From Miller Coors. Thank you, Doug. Joe Higgins, Joe from Comcast. Joe Higgins, hi Joe. Edward Wagner, is Edward here from the AIDS Foundation? Hi Edward. Daniel, I'm going to screw up your last name. Daniel Izquierdo. Daniel, are you here? Oh, he just walked in. Oh, Daniel, thank you for being here. We're recognizing you. Mel Parks from PwC. Mel, are you here? Thank you, Mel. Jason Van Langen from GE. Jason, are you here? All right, hi, thanks. Jeremy Dole from Fifth Third. Jeremy, all right, my bank friends. Jeremy Pettit from Ogilvy, our friend Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy, for our hosting. And Rudy Rios, where's Rudy? With the playlist. Thank you, Rudy. All right, so when we conclude, please take a moment to reach out to these guys. They got a lot of really great ideas. They're going to help inform a lot of the work that we're going to do moving forward. We appreciate them. We say thank you and recognize you and look forward to the work we're doing together. So with that, I say thank you and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.